It was called the Great Pox, the French disease, and the shadow behind the throne. It was an invisible enemy that infiltrated the most protected bedrooms in Europe, poisoning royal blood and driving monarchs to madness. It was syphilis, a disease that didn't just kill, it shattered dynasties, provoked wars, and changed the course of history. Behind the glitter of crowns and the luxury of palaces, bodies were being eaten alive, and minds were drowning in madness. Today, we'll uncover 5 stories of how one disease brought the most powerful people of their time to their knee. At the start of his reign, Henry VIII was the epitome of royal power, a tall, athletic, and educated Renaissance monarch. But by the end of his life, he had transformed into a bloated, festering paranoid. What happened? Many historians believe the answer is syphilis. The main piece of evidence is his famous leg ulcer. A wound he received during a jousting tournament never healed, turning into an open, foul-smelling sore that tormented him for decades. Chronic, untreatable ulcers are a classic sign of tertiary syphilis. But the disease didn't just attack his body. It devoured his mind. Fits of uncontrollable rage, a persecution complex that led to the beheading of even his closest advisors, all are symptoms of neurosyphilis, which attacks the brain. And perhaps most importantly, syphilis may have been the cause of his life's greatest tragedy, the lack of a male heir. In men, the disease can lead to miscarriages, stillbirths, and early infant mortality in their partners. Just look at the tragic sequence of pregnancies his wives endured. It explains why the strong and healthy Tudor dynasty suddenly found itself on the brink of extinction. Henry desperately changed wives and broke ties with Rome in search of a healthy son, not realizing that the curse was likely in his own blood. Ivan IV, the first Tsar of all Russia, went down in history as the Terrible. But what turned a calculating and talented ruler into a bloodthirsty tyrant who killed his own son? The answer may lie in the medical practices of the time. In the 16th century, the main cure for syphilis was mercury. Patients were given mercury-based ointments and pills, which caused terrible side effects. Mercury poisoning leads to hallucinations, paranoia, emotional instability, and fits of wild aggression. Now look at Ivan's later reign. The creation of the Oprichnina, his personal army of murderers, mass executions, a suspicion of everyone and everything, and that very fit of rage in which he killed his heir. Historians who examined the Tsar's remains found an extremely high concentration of mercury in them. Ivan likely contracted syphilis in his wild youth and then spent decades curing himself with a poison that slowly drove him mad. It was a vicious cycle of horror. The disease destroyed his body and the cure destroyed his mind, turning the Tsar into a monster and plunging the country into a reign of terror. He was the hope of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The son of Emperor Franz Joseph and the beautiful Empress Sisi, Crown Prince Rudolf was intelligent, progressive, and charming. But he was suffocating in the stifling atmosphere of the conservative Viennese court. In search of freedom, he threw himself into a life of alcohol and illicit affairs. At 23, he was married to the Belgian princess Stephanie. The marriage was a disaster from the start. Soon, Rudolf contracted syphilis and passed the disease on to his young wife. For her, it was a death sentence. The infection caused inflammation that made her infertile. All hopes for a new heir were crushed. Betrayed and humiliated, Stephanie refused to share a bed with him. For Rudolf, this was the beginning of the end. Tormented by pain, spiraling into depression, and realizing his life was ruined, he took a desperate step. On January 30th, 1889, at the Mayerling hunting lodge, he was found dead next to his 17-year-old mistress, Baroness Mary Vetsera. He shot her and then, a few hours later, killed himself. The court tried to cover up the truth, announcing his death was from an aneurysm. Mary's body was secretly taken from the castle, propped up in a carriage with a stick tied to her back to make it look like she was alive. Disease, despair, and lies killed the future of a great empire. Meet the original 17th century rock star, John Wilmot, the Earl of Rochester. A brilliant poet, war hero, and favorite of King Charles II, he was as brilliant as he was debauched. His life was one continuous performance, where witty satires were written between drunken riots and endless affairs. Once, when the family of his beloved refused him marriage, he simply abducted her in a carriage. He was thrown into the Tower of London, but the king pardoned him. He wrote brilliant but obscene poems, mocking everyone, from the aristocracy to the king himself. When he once again crossed the line, he was banished from the court. But Rochester didn't miss a beat. He began to travel around London under the guise of Dr. Bendo, a quack gynecologist who promised to cure infertility. Sometimes he even dressed up as his fictional wife, Mrs. Bendo, to examine young female patients alone. It's said that many of them did get pregnant, likely by the doctor himself. But the reckoning was horrible. By the age of 33, syphilis had devoured him. His nose literally rotted away. He went blind, lost control of his body, and suffered from hallucinations. Before his death, this greatest cynic and atheist of his time turned to religion, repenting for his sins. He died in agony, leaving behind a reputation as England's most scandalous genius. This story brings us to a more modern era, proving that syphilis continued its dark harvest into the 19th century. Lord Randolph Churchill, the father of future Prime Minister Winston Churchill, was a political superstar of his time. A brilliant orator, charismatic, and ambitious, he rose to the top of British politics with incredible speed. It seemed the post of Prime Minister was in his pocket, and then the inexplicable began. His speech became slurred, his gait unsteady. His parliamentary colleagues dismissed it as drunkenness, not realizing they were witnessing the first signs of neurosyphilis. His political career collapsed as quickly as it began. He made absurd mistakes, delivered incoherent speeches, and became a shadow of his former self. In a desperate attempt to regain his health, he embarked on a round-the-world journey, but the disease only progressed. He died at 45, completely ruined mentally and physically. His tragedy had a huge impact on his son, Winston, who throughout his life was afraid of inheriting his father's vice and was obsessed with reaching the heights that the disease had denied Randolph. From the rotting body of a tyrannical king to the clouded mind of a paranoid czar. From a gunshot that ended the life of an heir to the fall of a brilliant politician. These 5 stories are just a small part of an invisible epidemic that for centuries shaped the fate of the world. Syphilis was not just a disease. It was a secret player on the great chessboard of history, who toppled kings, destroyed dynasties, and proved that even the most absolute power can be helpless against a microscopic enemy hidden in the blood.